What's up, everyone? And welcome to a special bottle episode of this series. What's a bottle episode? A bottle episode is an episode, or it can be a movie, that is set almost entirely from one location, like one room, and they are often made as a way to keep a show's budget down because they're very inexpensive to produce. You're only filming one thing for the episode's duration. So, if you ever see an episode where two characters get stuck together in an elevator, or get trapped in a safe, or something happens to them that forces them to be confined to a really small place for an unnaturally long period of time, that's a bottle episode. And bottle episodes can be great. They don't have to be filler. Sometimes forcing characters to interact with each other by removing their ability to do anything else can produce really awesome moments. In this case, however, this is a bottle episode because Skyrim, as great as it is not a game devoid of bugs. First, let me set this up by saying that when I play a game like this that allows the player to sell things in the game and make in-game money, I always take advantage of it. I'm always lugging around a slew of objects and weapons and clothing that I have no use for other than that I can cash them in later. The irony, though, is that in most video games, and this is true of Skyrim as well, the best weapons and apparel that you can acquire are almost never available through merchants or shopkeepers. They're presented to you through missions. For instance, pretty much every sword that I used during this playthrough, I acquired them by completing various quests. And I get why that's the case. I understand why it can come off as a shortcut if you're able to purchase the best things in the game without necessarily progressing in the story. But there are games that have their own currency, whether it's gold or credits or bottle caps or zenny, where more often than not, you kind of just stumble upon the best weapons and gear more than you have to seek them out. Like, you'll be opening a random locker, or you'll smash a random vase, and all of a sudden you'll be in possession of, like, the best weapon in the game. And it makes the merchant aspect of those games sort of diminished. I've played a lot of RPGs where by the end of them, I'll have a ton of money, my character will be rich, but I won't have anything to spend it on, because there's no weapon or chest plate or helmet that I can buy that's more powerful than the random one I found in a treasure chest somewhere. And in this Skyrim playthrough, I'm gonna finish with about 50,000 gold septims, which is a lot, at least for me. But there isn't much I can spend it on. I keep playing these games expecting that I'll be able to go on a shopping spree in them and really put that money to good use before I have to stop playing them, but it rarely happens. I bring this up because very often when I'm playing Skyrim or any RPG, I'm close to being over-encumbered. I'm perpetually near the limit of how much crap I'm allowed to carry. And in this case, I completed a mission where, as a reward, a character named Fralia Greymane gave me a steel mace for rescuing her son. A mace that put me over the carrying limit, which made it so that I couldn't move fast anymore. Now, she happened to be very close to the center of Whiterun, where all the merchants are that I usually go to. So instead of dropping some things to make it so that I could move quickly again, which I could have done, I decided, screw that, I'm just going to slowly hop to the center of town while being over-encumbered. That way, I'll be able to sell everything without having to drop stuff, which was sort of dumb because the extra money that I would earn by doing this was almost nothing, and I could always just go back and get the thing I dropped later, but I'm stubborn, what can I say? So, I'm hopping as fast as I can to try to make up for lost time, and there was a bucket on the ground that I had dropped from an earlier visit, because that's how worthless buckets are, that even I was willing to part with one. And absent-mindedly, I happened to jump right on top of the bucket, which caused me to glitch to the bottom of the well that's in the center of town, which is notable because, as you can see, you're not supposed to be able to do that. And there was an invisible wall for the area that I was in, because they designed the well to be a well, just not one that you can ever access. And so, I found myself stuck in this well, unable to do anything but turn. I couldn't move, I couldn't jump, and even when I dropped some objects to make myself below the carrying capacity, I still couldn't move. What's funny is that there is a gold ring at the bottom of the well, and I can only assume that the developers put that there as an Easter egg, but I didn't know what I was looking at for a while, because I saw that there was this yellow round thing below me. And when I first saw it, I thought, is that an eye? Am I seeing my character's eye glitching to the surface like this? Is that how much I broke the game by getting down here, that I'm looking at my own eye? But no, it was a gold ring. A ring I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep at first. Initially, I assumed that I had jumped through the top of the well, and that me being over-encumbered had made me glitch to the bottom. But it wasn't until I began editing this that I noticed that it was the bucket that did it. And it made sense once I thought about it, because one of the bugs from Skyrim that I had totally forgotten about because I try not to take advantage of them, is that if you hold an object in front of you, or interact with one in a precise way, it is possible to glitch through solid objects in Skyrim. There are speedruns for the game where people have beaten it in like an hour by taking a cup or a plate or a bowl and using it to pass through walls and skip all the enemies and more or less get to the end of the game by only having to fight like once or twice. And I figured, upon review, that the same principle probably applied to buckets, and sure enough, it turns out that there is a specific bucket glitch in Skyrim that I had no idea about, where you can use buckets not only to pass through walls and not only to glitch through the ground, but to fly. There are YouTube videos of people levitating off the ground in Skyrim by holding onto a bucket while backing up, which causes them to float above the entire map, which is hilarious unless you didn't mean for that to happen and you hadn't saved recently, and now you have no choice but to plummet to the ground and lose all your progress because you got carried away in what you were doing. Fortunately for me, there was an autosave from a couple minutes earlier from when I left that woman's house, so it wouldn't have been that big a deal if it turned out that I was permanently stuck in the well and had to revert to an older save. It could have been so much worse. I have played games where I have lost all of my work, lost hours and hours of progress because of bugs. And it's such a deflating moment when that happens, because you realize that all your hard work, everything you've just done, hasn't counted, and now you have to start all over again. And it makes you want to take your game system and throw it in a swimming pool and never play it again. I say this from experience because when I was growing up, I was a colossal fan of these two Microsoft PC sports games that came out around the same time, NBA Inside Drive 2000 and Microsoft Baseball 2001. And both games were great if you could look past the fact that they were insanely buggy. In Microsoft Baseball, there were certain pitchers that you could not bring in relief, because if you did, it would automatically crash the game. Like, if you brought in Byung-Hyun Kim of the Diamondbacks, gone. Your game would instantly crash, and there was no save. You could start Byung-Hyun Kim, you could start Vincente Padilla, but if you brought them in from the bullpen, like you should have been able to do, there was an 80% chance your game was toast. And with NBA Inside Drive, there was a glitch where the referee would throw a jump ball to begin overtime, in which the ball would never connect with either player, meaning that you would be forced to watch the referee throw an infinite number of jump balls at center court that you could never connect with before you'd eventually have to quit because you couldn't actually start the overtime of this close matchup that you'd been playing for an hour. And I'll never forget, one time I was playing as the Detroit Pistons against the LA Lakers with Kobe and Shaq, and I made an insane comeback. I was down by like 10 with a minute to go, and I erased it, and I got it to overtime, and John Barry hit a shot for me from half court at the buzzer at the end of the first overtime to tie the game and send it to double overtime. It was the first and only double overtime game I had ever played on Inside Drive, and I was so happy. I felt like I had won the championship by hitting that shot. It was the greatest gaming experience I had ever had. It was thrilling. It was then 126 to 126, going into the second overtime. The ref goes out to initiate the jump ball to begin the period. He throws the ball at half court, and both players miss it. The ball bounces awkwardly to the ground a couple times, and the ref goes to pick it up to throw it again. And I was horrified that this was happening. I was like, no, 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 please don't do this to me. This is like the greatest game I've ever played. I'm never gonna be able to replicate this, please. I need the closure of winning this. Don't take this double overtime thriller away from me, please. I must have spent an hour trying everything I could to salvage that game, but I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. I tried to hit the jump ball 100 different ways, pressing 100 different button combinations, to no effect. And I quit the game, knowing that all I had done to get to double overtime was for naught. I was so mad. There was a brick fence that was on the opposite end of the backyard of our house that I was living in. I think I went outside and threw rocks at it. I was so furious at the game for cheating me out of this magical moment. And true enough, I did not play that game again for a long time. And that was a game that I kept playing years and years after it was released, which I think a lot of sports fans do. Instead of buying the newest annual edition of a sports game that I liked, what I would do is manually update the rosters so that the teams would match what they were in real time. That way the teams were current, but I was still playing last year's version. I actually remember creating a digital version of LeBron James for the Cleveland Cavaliers in NBA 2K3 and just assigning him attributes that I thought seemed right. And by the way, I must have done the same thing with that Lakers-Pistons matchup because John Barry didn't actually join the Pistons until 2001. Several years after NBA Inside Drive came out. So, not that you care, but I'll never have another opportunity to talk about this, so I figure I might as well just get it all out there. Well, I still can. Anywho, to get back to Skyrim, and this well, I eventually guessed that if I dropped a couple objects and made myself under-encumbered again, I could probably fast travel out of the well, and it turns out that I could. And that's exactly what I did, and that's how I got out of the well and back to the game. However, when I dropped some of those objects, I couldn't help but notice that they were more or less stuck in the same invisible silo that I was in, and it gave me an idea, which was, what if I dropped every single object that I owned in this incredibly tight space? Would it be possible to use those objects as footing, which would allow me to move again and escape through the top of the well? I wanted to find out if the physics of this game worked how I thought they did. So, I saved the game while I was still in the well and made a separate save for when I fast traveled out of it, and then I loaded the old save, the one that was just for shits and giggles, and proceeded to drop everything I had that I was allowed to drop. So I dropped every sword, every pelt, every gem, every potion, every ingredient. It was a little tedious, and I could have made the well even more stuffed if I wanted to, because I could have dropped every arrow individually instead of dropping them in large bundles, but that just seemed excessive. And my experiment sort of worked, but not in the way I thought it would, as you will see. If nothing else, it's pretty crazy that you can more or less recreate a cash grab machine inside Skyrim, and all you need to set it up is a bucket. If it sounds like I've built up a tolerance to bugs like this in Skyrim, it's because I have. Bethesda games, while often great, are also known for having all sorts of technical problems. But the ones in Skyrim are more goofy than they are debilitating. Like, if you watch the previous 3 episodes, you've seen a fox and an elk not moving when they get to a slope, and you've seen an axe just floating in midair in the middle of nowhere for some reason. They're pretty harmless glitches. They're not the sort of ones that'll make you want to punch your television. So I'm willing to just sort of excuse them. As long as bugs don't grind the game to a halt, I can overlook them. Now, if you want an example of a Bethesda RPG that was plagued with bugs that did hinder the gameplay, look no further than Fallout New Vegas, a game that probably would be among my favorite games of all time, if not for the fact that it was barely playable. I bought Fallout New Vegas right when it came out, when it had not been patched, and even if it was, I didn't have internet access where I was at the time, so I wouldn't have been able to install the update anyway. And launch release Fallout New Vegas was the glitchiest, most sloppily put together AAA video game I've ever played. And that's including Microsoft Baseball and NBA Inside Drive. And man, When your game has more technical issues than Microsoft Baseball, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. If you're not familiar with Fallout New Vegas, all you need to know is that it's basically Fallout 3.5. It's Fallout 3, but set in an apocalyptic version of Las Vegas instead of Washington, D.C. And it plays pretty much exactly like Fallout 3, with the exception of some new survival tactics that aren't essential and that I pretty much ignored in the game. New Vegas came out just 2 years after the release of Fallout 3, which was an extremely quick turnaround considering that Fallout 4 wouldn't come out until 5 years after Fallout New Vegas. And the developers of New Vegas, Obsidian, Bethesda published it, but it was produced by Obsidian, basically said later on that they rushed it out to meet a schedule and that the scope of the game was so huge that it wasn't possible to release it on time and beta test everything. That they kind of had to live with the fact that it was going to have bugs in it when they released it to the public. Which, needless to say, is a little problematic. In Fallout New Vegas, you would routinely glitch through rocks if combat was engaged. There were creatures in the game called rad scorpions, which were these giant radioactive scorpions, hence the name, and I remember getting nervous every time I would wander into the desert and be approached by a rad scorpion. And it wasn't because I was afraid of being killed by one, it was because I knew that if I had to fight one near some rocks, there was a tremendous chance that I would wind up glitching through it, and in such a way that I couldn't fast travel out of it, and that I would wind up losing all my gameplay. That happened to me, seriously, at least 10 times. The game would also lag like crazy anytime there were a bunch of NPCs on screen, which was a huge issue because the bulk of the game is you deciding which alliance you're willing to side with. So there would be battles where the frame rate would slow to a crawl anytime there were like 15 people on screen. There were even glitches that occurred that you wouldn't find out about until like 20 hours later, so that you wouldn't even know that something was off with your experience until it was too late to do anything about it. At one point, one of the factions that I had worked with the whole game sent a messenger to tell me that my crimes against them would no longer be tolerated and that I was now an enemy of them, which made no sense because I'd been helping them all along. And then, at the end of the game, all of a sudden, the group that I had more or less pled myself to, suddenly I was fighting them. I was attacking the very people I had spent the entire game assisting. Meanwhile, a group that I had wiped out, that I had personally slaughtered, was back from the grave, and now I was fighting alongside them for some reason, even though they should have been dead. It was probably the emptiest gaming moment I've ever had beating New Vegas, because the game spit out a conclusion for me that didn't match the choices I had made. Everything I had done in the 60 plus hours I had spent playing it didn't matter. All the glitches and bugs that I had tolerated to get to the finish line were just so that I could get an ending that had nothing to do with the path I'd taken. It was such an underwhelming experience that I actually sold the game, which I almost never do when I buy one at full price. Although for what it's worth, I almost never buy games at full price. But when I do, when I buy the physical copy of something, I like to collect them. Even bad games. It's how I can justify spending so much money on one game. I'll say to myself, well, I'm doing it because this game is an investment. It's something I'm going to hang on to even when I'm done playing it. But New Vegas was so bad that I didn't want it to be part of my collection. Like I needed it out of my house. It was so disappointing to me. What complicates everything I'm saying about New Vegas, though, is that if you've never played the game before and you purchase it now, all these years later, there is a strong possibility that you will not encounter the same issues that I had with it because a patch was produced for it that fixed a lot of those problems. And when it wasn't being glitchy as hell, New Vegas was a really fun game. I actually remember parts of it better than I remember parts of Fallout 3, weirdly enough. But that doesn't mean much to me, because I bought the game when it first came out, when it was barely operational. So, whoop-de-doo that they fixed it later. I didn't spend $60 on that game so that it could be better after I had already played it. Like, this is an inherent problem with the gaming industry. because games are this weird medium where the official version keeps being updated even after it's officially come out. Because publishers are always going to be pushing the developers to get out their product as quickly as possible. And they know that they can probably fix whatever issues there are with it later in the form of an update, so there isn't that much incentive for them to delay the release of something that has a ton of errors in it, even though that's what they should do. That's why New Vegas getting released, even though its creators recognized that they were unleashing something that wasn't finished, isn't uncommon. But it's terrible for consumers, because too many times you're going to get penalized if you pay full price for a video game. You're paying a premium for an inferior edition of a product. For instance, if you go and see a movie in the theater on day one, it's an expensive thing to do, but seeing a movie in its first incarnation on a giant screen is the best form of that experience. Whereas with video games, the launch version of a video game is almost guaranteed to be the worst version of it, and yet it's the most expensive version of it. Like, I would be cool with paying for a buggy video game at its launch if it came at a discount. If Bethesda was like, hey, here's New Vegas, it's kind of choppy, it may have some rough patches, but we'll give you a voucher or something if you're willing to give it a go anyway. I'd be like, okay, sure, sounds good, thanks for being transparent. But, that's not how it works most of the time. And it sucks because you're taking a calculated risk if you spend full money on a video game. It sucks knowing that if I had never played Fallout 3 and wasn't familiar with the franchise, I probably would have had a much better experience with Fallout New Vegas because I wouldn't have bought it right away and would have wound up playing it when it wasn't broken. So, yeah. The moral of the story is this. Everyone wants video games to continue to advance. We all want games to be ambitious and inventive and to attempt things that have never been done before. And I think most of us recognize that sometimes bugs and glitches can come with that territory and can be the cost of innovation. I think most gamers are willing to forgive a certain amount of technical difficulties so long as they feel that the errors in it aren't debilitating and that the product was released in good faith. But that's the rub. There's a thin line between a game having small, manageable errors that the programmers likely didn't know about or couldn't have foreseen when it was first released, and a game having so many errors and so many critical problems that they had to have known about them beforehand and yet released it anyway because they just wanted your money. The bugs in Skyrim, at least from my experience, are so small that they're practically cute. I fell through a well, but I was able to jump out of it somehow. So, no harm, no foul. The ones in New Vegas, on the other hand, were unacceptable, given that it features the same game engine from Fallout 3. This was not a title that was attempting new things that had never been tried before in video games. It had no excuse being shipped as buggy as it was. And instead of being able to justify what value it might have had in spite of its problems, I came away feeling like Bethesda tried to pull one off on me. So, that shouldn't happen. It's better for everyone. It's better for developers who do work really, really hard on these games. It's better for consumers if these things just don't get released until, they work. And that's all I have to say. I always feel like I have to end these videos on some big, larger point. Like, I'm working up to some grand thesis in every one of these videos, but, I don't know. Buggy games, they suck. But, some bugs are okay. I don't know. What was the buggiest game you've ever played, viewer? Let me know. And, I don't know. I'll look over them. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye!